Winnipeg is about to face the first real boomerang that I can recall in their schedule in some time. Calgary, Utah, Colorado, Utah, and then Calgary. Why the schedule makers did this, I don't know, but it should make for a good 5 games of Winnipeg Jets action.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about a very strange part of Winnipeg's schedule. They have what you might call a boomerang of 5 games where apparently we're going to be facing three of the same teams. Well, Colorado technically just once, but, Calgary and Utah twice. For all intents and purposes, let's just say it's a boomerang. And not really one that you're likely to see all that often. Maybe with the schedule compression, this is why it's happening. A very strange thing that the NHL has done this year with the Four Nations tournament, which, by the way, it sounds like tickets ain't selling like hotcakes for that. Maybe if you charged normal prices for what people would want to be able to afford for that, they'll show up. But in terms of this upcoming stretch of the schedule, it's going to be an interesting one. A couple of home games, couple of road games, and Winnipeg has a really good chance to take, 6 points against the Central and also show off a little bit against the Calgary Flames. And, with the predominance of this stretch being at home, 3 out of 5 games will be on friendly ice. That should give the Jets a sizable advantage. But we'll chat about that in just a brief moment. Let's first kick off with the opening part of the schedule, right? Winnipeg versus Calgary. Now, the Jets are going to be seeing this Flames team twice, and Calgary has been relatively decent this year. I don't think that they're nearly as bad as a lot of people were expecting. You look at their record, and you know what? It's not terrible. They are very firmly in the wild card and not exactly in the top 3 of the Pacific, and there is almost no chance that they get up into the top 3 at any point this season. They're kind of in a rebuild state, right? So the Flames are one of those teams where if they make the playoffs, that's probably a slight miracle. Very impressive for them, given what they have on hand. But the Jets also can't just take them lightly. This is still a team that has 21 wins, which is more than a lot of the bottom of the West is currently holding. So not a slouch of a team. Defensively, pretty stingy. Offensively, they've done enough to where they've been able to keep themselves in the conversation. But recently, I think the fact that the team is definitely thin on talent is starting to show up a little more frequently. They are 5-5 in their last 10. So Winnipeg has a pretty good opportunity to come away with big points here. And we'll preview what lines the Calgary Flames might be using later in this episode. After that, though, the Jets are going to see a slightly familiar face under a new guise here, the Utah Hockey Club. I still hate calling them Utah Hockey Club, but it is what it is. Utah is really spiraling. After a stronger start, I think a lot of injuries have, quite frankly, devastated them. They had, a good portion of their back line sidelined for a good chunk of the start of the season, and it just seems like it's finally catching up. They're 2-7-1 in their last 10 games. They're on a 3-game losing streak, and things haven't really been all that great for them lately. Now, I will say for Utah, if they have a rough season, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they move a player or two, maybe some guys who are expiring. Schmaltz, of course, is one of those guys I've been a big fan of for a while, but I would also have interest in a guy like Barrett Hayton. There's quite a few players on this team who could potentially fill really good middle six roles for the Jets and who would be upgrades on what they already have. But whether, I guess Utah, if you can, the Utahns, what do you say what is their name other than just Utah Hockey Club? It just sounds weird, right? But the Utah folks, they may not be as eager to make a big change. This team invested a fair bit of money and assets in the offseason, improving the roster. I have some doubts as to how much this team has actually really improved, but I will say they definitely went for it, and they've got some really exciting young talent. Dylan Genther is great. Logan Cooley is great. Of course, Clayton Keller continues to be very good. So there are some bright signs for the future, but this team right now I think they're too beat up. And in my mind, this is another opportunity for the Jets to come away with a couple of big wins. Now, sandwiched between two of these games against Utah, you've got a road game in Denver, and this is going to be a tough one. The Avs are very tough to put down. Now, the last game the Jets played against them, Winnipeg frankly walloped. That was, in my mind, the best game that they have played against Colorado in many moons, certainly since that end of the season drubbing last year. But I would say that in this game, it felt, like a sustainable kind of victory. The Jets controlled the game. They controlled the 5v5 pace, and Colorado just didn't really have much going. And that is actually pretty impressive because the Avs are a frankly very good team. For the past few weeks, they have kind of had some mixed results in some of these games, but for the most part, Colorado has typically been rolling at 5v5. It's just that they're a little top heavy, and sometimes that can really show up if you're facing a deeper team that manages to find some way to keep McKinnon and Makar off the score sheet, or at least a little bit more neutered, right? Their impact is a little less pronounced, but definitely not a team to sleep on. I do feel a lot better about this upcoming matchup should the Jets stay with their current lines. I think the way that Winnipeg has approached the last couple of matchups is great, and I really hope that they continue that. This upcoming stretch where a couple of players will be coming back for the Jets, I think is a really big test of how this org, quite frankly, evaluates their forward talent and the success of their lines. What I'm hoping is that Arniel has seen enough already in 3 games, and potentially more, including tomorrow, to just roll with it, right? This team is rolling right now. Their 5v5 play has really picked up, and in my mind, I don't really see a reason to change things. Other than the top line, which you could technically improve, even they're doing well enough to where I don't think you necessarily have to make a change now. It was a little bit different when, the middle 6 and bottom 6 weren't producing as much, but now that most of the lines are seemingly back on track and things are rolling, and it's only a matter of time before the second line really explodes, you can probably keep it for now. So, a Rocky Mountain option for the Jets here on the road should be a fun game. It's going to be a late one, 8:30 for a lot of you, 9:30 p.m. for me because, of course, I'm on the East Coast. So will be an interesting one, but I do feel better about this game for the Jets than I did against some of the other Colorado matchups, especially on the road. So cross your fingers that I didn't just jinx this and that, in fact, Winnipeg actually does play well. Now, after that, they've got a rematch against Utah on Friday, and then the Flames game at home on Sunday. After that, the Jets will be on the road for a little bit against the East, and one of those games I will actually be at, Winnipeg versus Washington, February 1st. I am looking forward to that. It's been ages since I was last down to DC for a game. Also been a while since I've been able to catch the Jets here in town. So looking forward to it. These are two of the teams that are quite frankly first in the league right now. So it should be a fantastic outing. I'm expecting a very tightly run game and hoping that, a big Jets win gives us something to cheer about against, again, the number 1 team that is somehow not Winnipeg. We have 2 number 1 teams right now. So ain't that pretty cool? One in the East and one in the West. But let me know what you're predicting for this stretch over the next 5 games. What do you think of this Boomerang? I'm going to have the Jets going 4-1. I think that is somehow possible, but a little bit challenging. Wouldn't be surprised if it's more like 3-2, which is fine. A 3-2 record on a sort of bouncing around home and road situation, not the worst. But I'm going to give the confident vote of 4-1. But again, give me your record predictions below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, it's actually time to talk about how the Calgary Flames are going to open this one, and perhaps maybe even discuss if 1 or 2 of these guys might be an interesting trade target as we start getting closer to the trade deadline. But before we dive into all of that, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Obviously, this weekend, I am in for Ravens-Bills. It is going to be a great game. I would say in this one, I'm expecting a shootout. It may not be that way, but I would say over 3.5 touchdowns worth of offense per team. I just have that feeling it's going to be high scoring. I would say Bateman is probably a good one for a TD. Derrick Henry probably also a good one. On the Bills, Shakir has a good chance. Allen could probably toss 2 or 3 tutties, wouldn't surprise me. But the only way that you can actually get in on the action and get that $300 bonus is to visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, if you win your first bet, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. That's all at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are chatting about Winnipeg versus Calgary, the first game of this so-called Boomerang schedule. And Calgary has really been up and down the past couple of weeks. They are not a particularly great team, but they have some interesting players and some guys who are really punching above their weight. Now, right now, they are going through a little bit of an injury crisis. The losses of Mantha and Zary for an extended period definitely have a pretty pronounced impact on this team. Both were playing well for the Calgary Flames, and both are rather important parts of their top 6. So now that they're gone, the Flames have had to improvise and not exactly giving them the exact results I think they would be hoping for. But up front, first line, Huberdeau, Kadri, and Pospisil. Pospisil is actually a good player when he's not trying to decapitate Cole Perfetti, so I am a little worried about that. The Jets are going to want to keep everyone away from Pospisil. He's just very goony when he's not playing good hockey, and it's just very frustrating. Again, he can actually be a pretty serviceable middle 6 player, but the fact that he just goes headhunting every once in a while is rather frustrating. Kadri is probably one of the guys that if I was talking about a potential trade option, he could be a very interesting fit for the Jets. He's been talked about before. I worry a little bit about the term with him, but in terms of like his age and performance and his ability to score at these current rates, it's probably a worthy risk, and he might not be like ridiculously expensive. That said, the cap hit's not inexpensive. It's like $7 million something. So the Jets, if you're looking for a more veteran option and somebody that might fit Winnipeg's price bracket in a way that doesn't necessarily just bend them over the barrel for all of their assets, I could see that happening. The Flames have not exactly been a big trade partner for the Jets in the past, but there's no saying that they don't make a deal now. The only thing with Kadri is that he is like 34 right now, and he's got 5 years, including this one, on his current deal. So I would expect the next 2 to 3 years to still be productive, and after that, things may start to change a little bit. But, assuming that he remains who he is, which is a very good top 6 center and somebody who's, really, really good in the forecheck, good in tight spaces down low, and has generally been just very, very productive for Calgary, I wouldn't hate it. Last year he had like 75 points. A couple of years ago, he had 87. He does sort of punctuate these with like 35, 45, 50-point seasons, probably, limited thanks to some injuries and stuff, and of course, recent COVID stuff. But in terms of this season, he's a little over half a point per game, and I would imagine that he comes to the Jets and probably accomplishes more. So, interesting thought. I don't know that the Jets would necessarily spring for him, but somebody I would keep an eye out for. On the second line, you've got Coleman, Backlund, and Coronado, and Coleman's probably the guy the Jets would have some level of interest in. Another guy who's got a little bit of term left. Coleman is, obviously 33 and certainly on the older side, but with 3 years, including this one at just under $5 million. His middle 6 to at times top 6 production is very nice. He can play center and wing. And, if you're looking for a guy who could bring that veteran savvy, but is still capable of skating pretty well and certainly has a little bit of a feisty edge, Coleman could be really good. He's also very nice on special teams. So, he's a versatile player. Both he and Kadri I could see being potential trade targets. I would probably look elsewhere personally right now, but if the market gets to be a little crazy, maybe the Jets revisit this conversation in March. On the third line, you've got Karens, Sharangovich, and Pelletier, and this is like a solid third line. Again, I think the Jets probably have a pretty decisive advantage when it comes to their depth units here. On the fourth line, you've got Lomberg, Rooney, and Dewar. I think the Jets' bottom six already, wins against this unit, and for Winnipeg's top six, assuming that they still go with the same lines, I think that this is pretty firmly advantage Jets. On defense, Calgary is kind of interesting. They've got Ball and Anderson on their first, Hanley and Uyghur on their second, and Bean and Paschal on their third pairing. I look at this as a team that's kind of not that dissimilar on the blue line to the Jets, where they definitely have one side that's really strong, and the other side, the left side's a little questionable at times. Their right side is fantastic, and so I wonder at some point if the Jets maybe swap a player, at some point, because Winnipeg's right side, it's sort of the inverse. We have a weaker right side and amazing left side, and I sort of wonder if Winnipeg tries to make something happen there for perhaps a Mackenzie Weegar or something of that nature. But again, that's probably a pretty big swing. Rasmus Anderson obviously is going to excite a lot of people, but I would imagine that he's probably not available. Very clearly one of Calgary's best players, a phenomenal defender, and an amazing puck mover. So not really expecting him at all, but hey, maybe the Jets swing for something crazy, but I would expect Winnipeg to go shopping more on the bargain end for now, and then we'll see if they start to maybe make a bigger swing for like a Stastny-like acquisition. Maybe Kadri or Coleman becomes that kind of guy for this team. They've got lots of options this year, and I'm very excited to see what the Jets do. They've got a great pool of assets. I don't think that there's really too much worry about sacrificing your future, because Winnipeg's already committed to winning now. You might as well cash in your chips and see what you can turn out. So should be a good game for the Jets, though. Maybe an audition for a couple of guys who could potentially come to the Jets. I don't know that I would necessarily read loads into it, but hey, Calgary could be an interesting trade partner as we start getting towards March, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that and perhaps some realistic scenarios, whether it's the Flames or other ones, as we get closer to that point. But for this game, I would say I'm expecting a Winnipeg win 4-1. I could see happening. In net, Dustin Wolf has been pretty good recently, and Vladar is okay as a backup, but Wolf, I think is a really exciting young player, a very fun prospect, and somebody who, I think a lot of Flames fans are really circling for the future. He looks pretty legit, and, his numbers this season may not seem like crazy, but given, Calgary is not exactly the deepest team right now, I would give him a level of the benefit of the doubt. So, this year he's rocking a 914. It's actually better than I thought it was from a couple of weeks ago. And, given, again, that Calgary is a rebuilder, Wolf does seem like their goalie of the present and future. Should be a fun game. I'm looking forward to it. Winnipeg has really been on a good win streak recently. I'm not expecting them to really make any line changes. The only exception is if a couple of guys are healthy enough to go. There was some conversation about maybe one of like Fleury or Miller coming back in. Mason Appleton and Vlad Nemesnikov were both doing an optional skate earlier today. So there is some chat about that. I don't know how real it is. I don't know how likely it is to happen. I've heard, John Liu was saying that there is a chance that both Fleury and Miller come back in. I would imagine that, that probably means both Stanley and Heinola sit. As long as it's like Fleury Miller, I'm not really going to complain too much. But, if Stanley somehow still plays, I would be pretty frustrated at that, especially if Heinola sits but Stanley still plays. My opinion on this, and I will talk a little bit about whether Heinola actually has chaos in this game. Murat Atesh of The Athletic was talking about this, and that he thought that Heinola fits more in the next season picture. But I want to challenge the notion a little bit that there's inherent chaos in his game, because I feel like sometimes, we're looking for things that perhaps may not be there. And I think in some ways, I've seen other scenarios where a player like Heinola plays with a different partner that's maybe less chaotic, and suddenly all of that criticism really doesn't hold a lot of weight. So we'll talk about that and Winnipeg's commitment maybe to this third pairing, because it's really one of the only things that they are very steadfast on, other than some of the forward lineups. But again, we'll chat about that in just a brief moment, and one of the strange things that, kind of comes out of all of this. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about an interesting comment from Murat Atesh. He had the sense, he said, of Heinola being more of a 25-26 player than one that's going to have a playoff impact this year. And his reasoning was that he still saw some chaos in Heinola's game. Now, I'll say this. I don't disagree that Heinola still has some rawness. And when you look at the fact that he's had, only a couple dozen NHL games, it's not really shocking. He's spent the majority of his career in the AHL. And honestly, I thought he was going to be gone by now. I actually would not be shocked if he ends up getting traded at some point during this trade deadline session. He is, bottom dollar price right now, and he did sign an extra year, which I was a little bit surprised by, not going to lie. But, a couple of years of guaranteed money after a big ankle injury is probably, not the worst bet for him to make. It is guaranteed cash, right? And at this level, in this league, there's no guarantee of salary if you are a player that's kind of on the margins like Heinola is. So, with him, I think he's kind of rounding into form in some of these games, especially playing alongside Stanley. Logan has kind of forced Heinola to rein in a lot of his worst tendencies. Ville is one of those guys who wants to make play happen, who wants to get the puck up the ice, and sometimes that's led to him cheating a bit. He doesn't really do it as much now, and I think with, having a pairing mate like Stanley, where Heinola has been more of the supporting, details-oriented player, I think it's really helping to grow his game. And, having seen Heinola play alongside Coughlin and Miller, I just feel like maybe part of the chaos is who you're pairing with him with, right? If you put Heinola with somebody who thinks the game the way that he does and who doesn't require as much cleanup after, their mistakes, I think you'll see a very different version of him. I just remember a couple of weeks ago, we had Ville and Dylan playing together, Coughlin, not Sandberg. And I thought for a third pairing, they were one of the best groups on the ice. They were fantastic. They dominated control of the game. And I just came away immensely impressed. And obviously, Heinola will still have some passes and turnovers and things that get him into trouble. He had one scenario a couple of games ago where he got beat on the inside net drive. Iafallo kind of struggled with the puck between two defenders, and it got turned over in the slot, and Heinola got beat towards the net. That stuff will happen. I will say that that's really the first time in a while that I've seen him directly lose that battle. Usually he ties up the stick relatively effectively. He's a guy who generally knows his own strengths and weaknesses, and I think he tries to play to those in that he wants to keep the puck along the walls, keep the puck moving, and get it back up the ice as quickly as possible. That's partly where sometimes he gets himself into trouble, is if he tries to do too much. But I think with, a Logan Stanley as your pairing mate, it does significantly limit the kind of impact that Heinola can have. Logan has, even at his best, struggled with turnovers and stuff, and you saw in some games where he'll try to pivot, he'll try to anticipate or skate back, and it doesn't work that well. And so I know that they view him as a penalty killer and stuff, but at some point the Jets, honestly, for Stanley's own personal benefit, they got to just kind of have him sit. I heard that there were fans who were booing him the other game. And, while I will be harsh and critical of this team at times, in general, I have not really thought it'd be good to boo a player. I don't really believe in that. The only time that I disagree and would do that sort of thing is if they're like just a straight up criminal or a piece of garbage. If somebody is like a legitimately terrible human being, boo the heck out of them all you want. But that's not really Stanley. He is trying his best. He does work very hard. I know that for a fact, and you can tell that he is trying to improve his game. It's just the actual performance hasn't really been there, and it's on the coaching staff to kind of recognize that. If you're thinking that there's chaos in some of these lines and pairings, maybe you should look at who is on them and how they're playing, because that might give you a little bit of a hint as to why maybe some of their line mates are struggling to keep up, or at least look like they're struggling. So, not to belabor the point, but I just think the Jets at times, especially when it comes to their blue line, have really struggled with good analysis and holistic assessments of what's happening. Sometimes, even if they get the higher level understanding and structure right, when they make individual decisions, they don't always seem to recognize why something's working. So will be interesting to see how this all plays out with both Fleury and Miller coming back in. I expect Fleury to be the left side guy and Miller to be the right side guy. Miller being on the right is totally fine. Fleury, I have some more mixed feelings about. As long as he's not in the top four, I don't think it's an issue. But his left side position is probably one the Jets are going to want to find somebody a little more concrete in. If they don't trust either of Stanley or Heinola to anchor that position, then they probably want to trade for something. Because I don't think you really want to have Fleury as your left-sided deal on the third pairing heading into the postseason. I think you'd want somebody with a little more certainty and veteran experience. Fleury has definitely had a few or more than a few NHL cups of coffee, but I think that there's a reason he's predominantly been more in a depth role or even in the AHL. So I would not really read too much into that. I would think the Jets are looking for some sort of either second or third pairing defender once the trade deadline rolls around, and perhaps a forward of some sort, to anchor the middle position, one of the center roles. But in terms of the current third pairing, I think that sometimes Winnipeg creates these situations for themselves. The chaos that Heinola sometimes exhibits, part of it is him. Sometimes he'll just make bad plays. That'll happen. But I think, the bigger scenario is, or sort of the higher level question is, are the Jets putting him in a position where he'd typically just fail, right? Are they making it actively more difficult for him? And I think in a lot of ways, having a pairing mate like Stanley does make your job harder. You have to be more conscious. You have to be, smarter and play a more conservative game. But I actually think that for Heinola, that's probably just a good thing anyways. Limit the turnovers, clean your game up, and I think that maturity and stuff can really help earn him a spot in the future. But for this season, that part I will say I do agree with Murat on. I think he does not really figure into Winnipeg's playoff plans. And, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets even trade him at some point because he's not really getting a big top four role with this team. I don't think that that's ever really going to happen. The only way that would maybe occur is if, the Jets see him predominantly on his offside, maybe on the right side along with Dylan Sandberg. But otherwise, there's not really a clear top four role for him. And if they don't trust him on the third pairing, they're never going to trust him with more responsibility on the second or even first pairing. So not going to get too excited about that, but hoping that, in whatever future games Heinola gets, he does at least his best and impresses in some capacity. So I'm sure this is going to be one of those scenarios where he goes to another team. He probably does really well. We've seen Chisholm and Kovacevic do well recently, and it wouldn't shock me if Heinola ends up in that same boat. So I will say that, for all the crap that he's put up with, he does really deserve a spot somewhere, whether it's with the Jets or somebody else. I just hope he finds some happiness and stability. Would be nice. He's had a rough couple of years, and some level of consistency and playing time would probably be a bit of a morale boost. But let me know what you think about all of this. Are you happy with this recent performance? Do you really think he's too chaotic? Drop your thoughts in comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Monday, of course, we'll have coverage of Winnipeg versus Calgary, hoping for a win, probably some preview stuff ahead of the game against Utah. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here next week. So have a great one. Enjoy your weekend and go Jets go.